Tenants and protesters in Michigan are demanding that lawmakers lower the rent, and they want them to do so by passing a tenants' bill of rights as well as rent control. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have an interesting article for you today, and it's coming out of the state of Michigan. So, Michigan, not known as being a place that is anti-landlord, but, there's only going to be so long before all of these sort of laws and rules and regulations, they spread throughout the rest of the entire country. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to get this tenant bill of rights passed, and it's basically a package full of all of the worst anti-landlord legislation that you've read about. Stuff like, just cause eviction protections, rent control, etc. Okay, it basically makes it so that the government or the state or the tenant rights groups control your property more than you would. And that's why I don't want to see this sort of stuff get passed. I want to see this sort of stuff just thrown out because it isn't realistic. It isn't realistic. It doesn't look at different factors within the economy. Like if you look at the places where rent control regulations are controlled by like a rent control board, like up in New York City, they don't even look at inflation as a factor. They're like, well, inflation is 8%, but we feel like the tenants can only afford a whatever percentage, a 2% rent increase right now. So what it comes down to is rent increases are based more upon emotion, based more upon emotion and feelings than actual facts. So landlords end up suffering because of it, but they are more concerned about themselves than they are about the market in general. And I understand why. Everyone is going to have their own best self-interest in mind, but it's up to the politicians to look at the overall picture and decide what is best for their state. And the state of Michigan is a state where they have very, very slow or maybe even declining population, okay? You don't want to scare away people by driving up costs, by adding more government regulations, by making things more difficult for businesses to operate, okay? You don't want to do that. You want to make things easier. You want to lower taxes. You want to lower government regulation. You want to attract those businesses to your state. And then when the businesses come, hopefully they bring jobs, and then that hopefully will lead to more people wanting to live there. That's my logic. Okay. Unfortunately, places like California, they thought they could get by on the weather alone. And now even the state of California is facing declining population due to the same problems that, have driven people away from areas since the beginning of time. Okay. But anyway, before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like and subscribe button, leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think. Do you think that the tenant bill of rights, do you think that, things such as rent control or eviction protections, things that are made to help keep housing affordable, help keep people housed, do you think that they are going to have a positive effect on an area or a negative effect? Do you think there are unintended consequences that could come along with it? And do you think it could further push a state like Michigan, that is somewhat declining due to just the loss of all the manufacturing decades ago? Do you think that could push the state of Michigan more into the negative? I'm curious what other people think, and leave a comment down below. Let me know. And let's get into the article. This article is coming from DetroitNews.com, and it says, protesters demand lower rent as Michigan lawmakers ready rent overhaul. And lawmakers, a lot of the times, rather than looking at what's best for the state in the long term, they look at what's the best for them in the short term. In other words, how can I keep my job as a lawmaker? Okay? They are only worried about getting votes. And since in places like Detroit, the renters outnumber the homeowners, well, they are going to try to get the votes from those renters. And the easiest way to do that is by saying, hey, we're going to keep your housing affordable forever. We're going to stick it to that evil landlord. The problem is, though, right, that landlords, they're not going to just stick around and take it. and that's why the available housing stock will decline, especially the affordable housing stock. So anyway, let's get into the story. Protesters gathered on the Capitol lawn in simmering heat Tuesday to demand affordable rental costs in Michigan, which had the 9th largest year-over-year rent increase as of August in the United States. Joining them were several lawmakers poised to introduce this fall a rental bill of rights, as well as laws governing migrant worker housing and a repeal of a 35-year-old statewide ban on rent control. The Tuesday rally, organized by the Rent is Too D-High coalition, was meant to build solidarity among renters facing rising costs and worsening living conditions at rentals across the state, organizers said. And yeah, I try not to cuss, so I didn't want to say the D word there. But yeah, they're protesting, and they want to get rid of a 35-year-old statewide ban on rent control. As I mentioned in another video, a lot of states back 20, 30, 40 years ago made the wise decision, seeing that the politics were changing. We are going to make sure that we ban rent control now before we lose power. That's what the more conservative politicians did, and it was a smart move because it's kept places like Michigan from having rent control implemented, especially in major cities that are much more left-leaning. Okay, so yeah, I mean, it's protected the state for now, but they really are trying to work to get that rent control ban removed. We're fighting against decades of misinformation and propaganda from special interest groups that profit from exploiting this basic human necessity, said Sarah Huerta Long, a Rent is Too Darn High organizer from Lansing. Michigan's average rent grew year over year by about 8.6% as of August, according to Rent.com. The Detroit, Warren, Dearborn area experienced the largest year-over-year increase among metro areas, with a 4.7% increase from August, according to the site. And as a lot of you know, an area where rents are very, very low, they're going to experience more rent growth than an area where rents are already very, very high. That's just a fact, okay? There's more room for it to grow. So the area like Detroit, where rents were much, much lower than other metropolitan areas of the same size around the country, because I believe Detroit has around 4 or 5 million people who live in the entire metropolitan area, right? So they would be comparable to, I'm trying to think of a metro area that would be about the same size. I know like Minneapolis, St. Paul is like 3 million. I can't really think of right now an area but let's just say compared to Minneapolis, St. Paul, okay? So we've got Minneapolis, St. Paul over here, and then we've got Detroit over here. Well, the rents over here, Minneapolis, St. Paul, are considerably higher than the rents over here in Detroit. Or like Seattle, I believe Seattle's around the same population. So the rents in Seattle are obviously sky high compared to a place like Detroit. So when the rents go up, the rents are increasing in all the cities throughout the country, almost all the cities throughout the country, due to just the outrageous inflation or whatever. But there's more room to grow in Detroit because the rents were at such a low rate before, and that was really caused by the fact that they have a declining population, because they have just more housing than they need for the number of renters. And so yeah, they are going to face more rent increases compared to comparably sized places, even compared to smaller places, okay? So yeah, the fact that they are a declining area is part of the reason that rent increases grow so much there, because they were super cheap. Amy Brock, a Grand Rapids renter, said her rent for a studio built in 1970 increased about 40% over the past 3 years and now costs $1,100 a month. Housing is a human right, Brock said. As humans, we need access to food, water, and shelter to survive. I'm going to stop right there, because this is the same typical idiotic argument I hear, right? But even like reading her quote, she's like, as humans, we need access to food, water, and shelter. But you notice that they want shelter alone to be, fixed price. Food's price isn't fixed. Water prices aren't fixed. Water's not free. Food isn't free. Shelter isn't free either, okay? When I go down to the grocery store, everything, and I mean everything, costs more than it did just 3 years ago. She's talking about, oh, well, my prices my rent has gone up 40% over 3 years. That's actually not too bad, okay? If you were telling me your rent went up 40% in 1 year, that'd be different. But over the course of 3 years, we're talking about a 13% rent increase, for 3 years in a row, and your rent is still only $1,100 a month. And I know that you might be having trouble affording that, right? But $1,100 a month rent is below the national average for rent in this country. It is, okay? You are still not doing that bad considering all of the inflation and all the nonsense we went through. I bet I'm 100% sure that you didn't say, hey, I'm going to save this stimulus money that they paid out, that the U.S. government paid out during the pandemic, because I might need it at some point in the future. Well, part of the reason we have so much inflation is because of that stimulus money. But anyway, I'm on a rant. I like to rant about stuff. But yeah, hang in there if you're a landlord in Detroit. I don't think this stuff is going to pass yet, okay? If the economy takes a turn, people are going to really, really push hard against us landlords, and we're going to really, really suffer because of it.